morning, and welcome to Avolution's 6th Digital Enterprise Architecture Summit, an event that really is going from strength to strength. And so for many of the returning attendees, it's great to have you back. And for newcomers, of course, a warm welcome to you too. We're delighted to have you all join us. As always, this summit is a truly global event. Over the next 2 days, we'll connect architects across all time zones, from Australia and Asia Pacific to Indonesia, India, and the Middle East, from here in the UK and Europe, and of course, North America and South America. And once again, we've partnered for this event with the Association of Enterprise Architects, the Open Group, and we're therefore delighted to be able to welcome memberships of these two organisations to this event too. So, welcome to you all. I'm Peter Collins, Avolution's Regional Manager here in EMEA, based in our London office. And looking at the agenda, I can see we have a programme that's filled with informative and inspiring sessions. From customers, our own team members, partners, and other industry experts. And as you'll hear during some of these sessions, demand for architecture expertise is now at an all-time high. We've been serving the architecture community for over 20 years here at Avolution, and we're proud to be a leading provider of solutions that can help you and your teams in organizations of all sizes to transform your business. And over these 2 days, you'll see plenty of good examples of how this can be achieved. So sit back, relax, and enjoy yourselves. And we'll very soon get started, but just quickly though, before passing on to our first presenter, here's a few housekeeping items I just need to run through. And really just to say that we're really keen for these sessions to be as interactive as possible. If you can add any questions that you have to the Q&A window at the bottom of the screen, we'll do our very best to get to all of these during each of the presentations. But also remember that the recordings themselves, in most cases, will be recorded, and registered attendees will actually get a link sent to them shortly after the event. Okay, so then without further ado, I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to our first presenter and keynote speaker, which is Dr. Tim O'Neill, founder of Avolution, and he's going to be presenting Fears, Fads and Superpowers, Enterprise Architecture in the Age of AI, which seems to be a very topical subject, Tim. So over to you.
No, thank you, Peter. Yeah, and I guess as Peter said, everyone's dialing in from all around the world. So I'm actually dialing in from Australia. So in Australia, we do, before we do any of these presentations, what's known as an acknowledgement of country. So I would just like to acknowledge the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm hosting this webinar from. And on behalf of the team in Sydney, I'd also like to acknowledge the Camaragal people of the Greater Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which the Avolution Sydney office is located. And just finally, I'd like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present. So with that, let us get into the presentation today. So, yep, thank you, Peter. And you're right, there's certainly, I guess, a lot of things about this. So it's no surprise to everyone, but basically, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming us all to the age of AI. You know, it seems obvious, and it's kind of here whether we like it or not. For those of you who attended my keynote last year, we looked at where we were in the hype cycle of AI, and we were, I guess, firmly on the upslope towards the peak of inflated expectations. So I provided some cautionary tales back then, and I even managed to work in Jean-Claude Van Damme's epic split video from the Volvo trucks in commercial 10 years ago, which, to be fair, was a bit of a life goal. Last year, we looked at the 3 T's, as we called it, for AI, and it was really around how trust is built through transparency and time. So it's a year later, some time's gone past. Are we feeling any more trusting in AI now than we were last year? In some ways, I'd say probably not. It's safe to say we're still on the upslope, I guess, towards inflated expectations. And yeah, sadly, there's a few situations where I think we're probably heading towards the trough of disillusionment. I don't know if you guys all know the way that the hype cycle works. As Peter alluded to, and I guess with anything that's unknown or new, there does come fear. So I wanted to spend a few minutes just looking at some of the fears associated around AI. And I guess just like a fear of spiders and snakes, there is some evolutionary rationale to the fears, but also sometimes those fears and phobias are really not justified. So again, I've told you I'm connecting from Australia, and I'm sure everyone knows that you've probably heard that Australia has 20 of the 25 most venomous snakes in the world. I know I used to live in the UK, and my British friends used to remind me of that all the time. Well, there's actually only a handful of snakebite fatalities a year in Australia, like literally, 2 or 3 amongst our population, which is 26 million people. Um, as it happens, the most venomous snake in the world, which is our inland taipan, and the key's in the name, it lives inland, has never killed anyone on record. Um, and I guess while we're talking about snakes and spiders, when it comes to spiders, there hasn't been a death from spider bite in Australia for over 40 years. So some fears are, I mean, everyone hears that Australia will kill you, but actually hasn't, no spiders killed anyone for 40 years down here. So just a cautionary tale there. But yes, we do like catastrophizing. What we kind of wanted to point out here is that, and this kind of applies more and more these days, that really you shouldn't believe everything you read or hear. So researchers have done longitudinal analysis of the sentiment and emotion in news headlines. So they looked at 23 million different news headlines. You can see over a time period up to 2019 from a whole host of publications in the US. And what you can see is since around 2010 the overall sentiment has actually been negative and getting worse and worse. And as I said, that's only up to 2019. So I guess the bottom line is we do live in a bit of a clickbait driven news culture, and negativity drives traffic, to news sites. So we've got to all remember that when we look at any of these things. We only hear the bad news, right? So just remember that when we look at AI and any topic really, for that matter. So whether you like it or not, your colleagues are already using AI in the workplace. So this is some data from a work trend analysis done by Microsoft and one of their portfolio companies, LinkedIn. Basically, they looked at how AI is going to reshape work in the labor market by surveying 30,000 people across 30 countries, looking at literally trillions of what they call productivity signals that they're monitoring with Microsoft 365, and obviously some research in some Fortune 500 countries, customers. What you can see, of course, is Gen Z are the most prolific at using AI. Now, this is AI that's not provided by the organization they work within. So invariably, that's going to mean, ChatGPT, right? The most popular one out there. So you can see already that, 85% of Gen Zs are using stuff that the company doesn't condone. Now, I'm in that Gen X category there, and I'm happy to say that I'm one of the 24% that don't use AI, not provided by the company, Avolution. Hopefully you all know that we do have machine learning built into Abacus, and I can assure you I'm one of the most prolific users of that. But thankfully that's provided by our company. So, and I'll obviously talk more about that later. And you can see, obviously, as you get older and older, the boomers are even less likely to be using things outside of the ones condoned by their company. And we'll talk about that a bit more. So speaking of clickbait, did you know in May last year, in fact, ChatGPT got hacked? Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I guess it's kind of sad that it's not even really a surprise to any of us. If you hadn't heard that before, it was certainly not a surprise to me last year when I first heard about it. And it's kind of not getting any better. Most recently, Google spent it was only a few $100s on doing some queries to basically trick ChatGPT into releasing the underlying training data that was used to train it. So they got something like 10,000 different data points out of ChatGPT. So if you think the stuff you're putting into ChatGPT is private, it's not. Okay. So there's concerns like this that have led actually a lot of our customers already to block access to ChatGPT. So it's okay. I won't feel bad if you look away now and you send a quick email to your security team to go and ask them to probably block ChatGPT as well. But it's certainly something that we all need to be a bit careful about. And it's probably a founded fear. And even if you're using a private cloud for AI, which is obviously where Microsoft's going with all their Azure work. So, yeah, private cloud's making a bit of a comeback thanks to AI. We're seeing huge spending on infrastructure around data centers. Okay, so essentially to regionalize things, so you can see some statistics here. Microsoft, Meta, Alphabet, just those three alone spent $32 billion US dollars in the first quarter this year. So Microsoft's intending to spend $14 billion a quarter going forward. So that's, $60 billion a year, just Microsoft alone. So that's a big bet. There's no doubt about it. And when it comes to digital sovereignty, so where is your data and having some ownership over it, or at least some regulatory control over it. This is actually a map of AWS, all their sites around the world. So they have 33 sites, or this is Amazon, of course, 33 sites already, and 6 more coming soon. Those red dots. Regulation requires a lot of organizations to have data resident, within their own country. So we definitely have a lot of clients like that. We use AWS, and we of course take advantage of all these different zones and regions that are at our disposal. But yeah, Forrester certainly predicts, so including those 6 that Microsoft are spinning up this year, probably 13 new regions just in 2024 alone coming online. Now, all of you probably know that most of this is powered by NVIDIA chips, and you all bought your stock in NVIDIA a year ago, right? And probably have retired as an architect by now. Um, NVIDIA chips are in 300 data centers across 25 countries. Now, they're pretty opaque about where that is from their own security point of view. They don't really want to give that away. So certainly you can rest assured that there's data centers a lot more than what you see here on this site, and even between um, all the major infrastructure providers too. And this gets us onto this, will AI take our jobs, right? So I think workers, really do need to be prepared for some level of adaptation, at least to AI. The latest Pulse survey out of Accenture recorded, though, a large drop in the usage of AI by business leaders. We talked about those boomers, not necessarily using things that aren't condoned by their organization, but apparently only 35% of the C-suite leaders claimed to personally be using a Gen AI tool, so probably ChatGPT, at least once a week. Now that's down from 61% just 6 months ago, right? So half, right? So this was research conducted in March, April this year. So it's really no surprise, though, when there's no transparency at all in large language models. So I'm getting to this later, but essentially, obviously it's trained on data, but it passes off things as fact, even though they might be completely wrong. Okay, so they call them hallucinations, of course, when they make up things, but nonetheless, it makes people lose a bit of confidence in what's coming out. So that lack of transparency is really leading to ChatGPT or large language models adoption really waning a little bit in the recent past. Sorry, um, but enterprise architecture skills are continuing to be some of the most in-demand skills out there. So there's all these different reports. Nash Squared and Infotech do these reports, and we'll look at these a lot more in detail. So don't worry, I've got some pretty good news for you guys on this call. And Accenture, together with the World Economic Forum, has predicted, basically where a lot of the work is going to be potentially adapted, for want of a better word, by AI. So it's definitely in a lot of the clerical and secretarial roles, and we'll look at that a lot in the different areas that actually AI might help, but also the areas that AI might start to take over in the next couple of slides. So yeah, this is the report coming out of the World Economic Forum done by Accenture. So on the left, you've got the top 10 jobs that are seeing fast growth, and on the right, the 10 most declining, and this is over the next 5 years. So you can see here that there's a big prediction of growth in digital jobs. In particular, there's actually a 40% jump in the number of AI and machine learning specialists that they're predicting this by 2027. So that's the number one, a 40% more, 30 to 35% increase in roles such as data analyst and scientist, big data specialists, 31% demand for information security analysts. Okay. But in general, those technical data science jobs are growing the fastest. And if you look there at number 10, digital transformation specialists just sneaks in. And I would argue that we as enterprise architects fall into that group. Digital transformation is the most popular use case that our clients ask us to help perform with them. So I think that's a pretty good sign. We're in the top 10 fastest growing group of roles over the next 5 years. Fantastic. Not such good news if you're in clerical or secretarial jobs. You can see there lots of the different things that, rightly so, should be a bit nervous about the impact that AI is going to have over the next 5 years. And again, I told you I was coming from here, dialing in from Australia. So for what it's worth, younger people and countries from the Commonwealth, you can see there, Australia, England, Canada, seem to be the most worried about AI. So this is research out of Stanford, which basically looks at, and Ipsos, which looks at things like, more than a third of Gen Zs expect AI to replace them, which is pretty, their work, which is pretty crazy, right? Compared to, the obviously Gen Xs and things like that are much less concerned about that. This research from Ipsos, you can see it shows that, 69% of Australians surveyed are nervous about their job prospects and what's coming with AI. So again, I'd argue that, some of these fears are a bit overrated. certainly here in Australia, we're a pretty leading technology nation, right? And you saw, those sort of roles that actually AI is going to help. I think arguably Australia is pretty well positioned to take advantage of that. But nonetheless, the Gen Zers are still using those large language models. Remember that the company doesn't, condone, and they're probably rewriting their resumes, using it to do that. So I guess public service announcement as Avolution is hiring. If anyone's nervous and would like another job, we'll happily talk to you. So go to our job site and yeah, apply for any of the jobs. Um, I think most of you who are on this call, you probably responded to our survey. So leading up to these events each year, we put out a survey to all of the thousands of people that are going to attend, and we get some fantastic insights into where all your heads are at and obviously what you're all thinking. So this was one of the questions in the survey. You probably remember it, and hopefully you were one of the people who clicked that 78% box. But basically, you can see there that you guys recognize that EA is more in demand than ever. And literally no one said that demand for their expertise had decreased. It was an option, and no one ticked it, right? So there's some pretty positive clickbait for everyone. If you want to quote something out of this deck today, you can say that the demand for EAs is certainly increasing. 78% of you think so. So that's pretty cool. So you guys know, and needless to say, you know that you're in demand, which is great to hear. But let's look at where large language models can help and where they're probably not so great. So obviously, it's going to change our job as well. There's no doubt about it. Our EA jobs are going to change. That's already probably happening for some of you. And we certainly have, obviously, techniques that will help it change. But when you look at large language models specifically, and this is a big study done by Boston Consulting Group, they had a number of their consultants using, it was GPT-4, ChatGPT-4. Basically, they found that when it was sort of creative product innovation, it made them 40% more, better performance, 40%, improvement. So that's pretty incredible, right? There's a pretty compelling business case for that. But look on the right. When it came to business problem solving things, it actually made them 20% worse. Right. So you've got to be really careful where you're using these large language models. And I'm sure any of you who've used it understand that, it'll just pass off things as fact, even though it's completely wrong. So you've got to be really careful what you use them for. So, it looks like they're pretty good, at writing, resumes and maybe chocolate cake recipes and things like that, but they're not going to be very good at helping you doing your technical debt reduction strategy. Right? Large language models alone certainly aren't. So, skilled technologists, subject matter experts, you've got to be careful not to fall into the trap of just using the content as if it's, correct. It's not necessarily right. You certainly need to use your judgment, which is obviously what you're skilled at. So yeah, that kind of takes us on to some of the, we talked about fears. Now let's look at some of the fads. I guess it's pretty clear, the evidence is in, there's some real advantages around large language models, but using them alone, especially for things like, business problem solving, I guess I guess I'd say at best they're kind of harmless, but at worst they're actually probably dangerous. They're really going to start making wrong recommendations which have no foundation and really will force us towards this trough of disillusionment. So I think it's just some kind of things to just keep an eye out for here, and like I say, some fads to just be a bit cautious about how we adopt these things. They're coming, we can't stop it, but we've got to be cautious how we adopt it. So again, looking at the survey we did with you guys, this was question 5 in the survey. We asked about what emerging technologies are coming that might help you guys perform better as EAs, right? And look at the 2 traditional things that were there. Okay, so the number one area that was suggested as an emerging technology is your democratized diagramming. Right. So, getting all the people in the organization to help you guys build an accurate repository of which then accurate, decisions can be made. Second most was actually data-driven analytics. So using numbers to help make decisions. These are 2 of the most traditional things. And we always talk about EA as being both data-driven and diagram-driven. They're 2 sides of the same coin. It's not one or the other. And yeah, nonetheless, when you start looking at large language models, sure, there's something that I think a lot of you think are going to be useful, but it's not just that. 22% of you thought that other types of AI and machine learning were going to be useful going forward in an emerging technology. And I guess that's a shout out for, I'm sure you've all heard of our Ask Abacus feature, our machine learning feature that we've been, building for many, many years, many, many years before all of this hype around, large language models came. And that's truly what it is. It's more than just a large language model. It's a deep structural machine learned model. And I'll talk a bit about that going forward. So yeah, the only thing constant in life is change, as they say. So just like how the demand for EAs is, well, constant at least, and certainly increasing, um, this is the reality of the world we live in, or definitely the organizations we live in. On average, there's 6 new applications coming online every month, right? And obviously, if you're a larger organization, it's 10 plus organizations. So I guess not only is there the the shadow AI, like we talked about back with the Gen Zers and things like that, people using AI that's not condoned by the organization. There's still the good old shadow IT. There's just more and more things coming online. And as architects, we of course need to be involved in that decision-making process and help make sure that the estates that we're, governing are actually cohesive and of course delivering on the business goals. So that's something that's not going to stop. That's always going to come. We're always going to need to make decisions about that. And positive change is pretty difficult to achieve. We've heard of these. I really don't like seeing these. I've been seeing them for many, many years. These sort of statistics, like 70% of digital transformations fail, 50% of cloud projects fail. I don't like hearing those things, but sadly, it's not going away anytime soon. And clearly, AI is not going to be the savior of that. So let's look into that a little bit more. And essentially, the uptake of automation has been slower than has been sort of predicted and expected. So if we look into that more, I guess the interface between humans and machines has kind of shifted. Obviously we're turning to these automation and some of these large language models, but as of today, organizations estimate that only 34% of business-related tasks are performed by machines. Obviously with the remaining 66% done by humans. So that's a negligible, only like a 1% increase on the level of automation that people thought 3 or 4 years ago. Okay. So obviously it hasn't changed as fast as they thought. The pace of automation back in 2020, they thought that 47% of business tasks would be automated by now. And that's obviously not the case. It's still only 34%. So as of today, or in fact, the end of last year when they redid this survey, the respondents revised down their expectations for the future of how much automation there was going to be only 42% now. So that's still only an 8% increase on where we are today over the next 5 years. So task automation is expected to vary from maybe 35% for sort of reasoning and decision-making things. So again, low, we're going to be using humans a lot more, all the way up to maybe 65% for more information and data processing tasks. So again, we've got to be kind of careful about our optimism here and don't just jump on the AI hype train. There is a lot of kind of caution to be applied here. And you guys, I don't know how you guys see this. I mean, there's different things. You need some thick skin, right? We're fighting battles on multiple fronts, right? But that really does present a great opportunity. And we'll look at these later, but the number one use case we're hearing a lot about now is that bottom right one, which is, what risks are involved around implementing AI? Okay, and I'll talk specifically about some approaches that we've got that can help you around that. But this is not going to change. You guys are question answering people. This is what we do as EAs. We help business understand these complicated problems. So again, back to our survey that we asked you guys, and we looked at the use cases or the top priorities that you were being asked to do. This has been pretty similar, pretty common, hasn't changed too much over the years. So it's still some of the most popular things like APM and technical debt reduction, road mapping, strategy, scenario analysis, governance, risk compliance, things like that. As I would argue, they're all things that a digital transformation specialist does, right? What we might call ourselves as EAs. So remember, we're in the top 10 fastest growing jobs out there, according to World Economic Forum, Accenture, right? But let's not kid ourselves. It's still all about cost. So most surveys still say that all of these things need to be positioned within a cost framework. And in fact, 59% of decision makers, they serve, Flexera surveyed decision makers. They found that cost optimization was still the primary consideration when looking to transform a business. So it's still around cost. So let's not lose sight of that. While it's all these other things, they're still fundamentally based around cost. So yeah, we're in an interesting world, right? So we need some superpowers. So EAs are more in demand than ever, and I would argue uniquely positioned to deliver value to their organizations for the most prescient questions that are being asked. But they're going to need some superpowers. We're all going to need some superpowers rather than just jumping on this large language model, hype train. So let me sort of talk through some of those things I think we can offer, because we definitely need them when we're confronting things like this. High rates of change, like we talked about. The only constant in life is change. High expectations, do more with less. We're going to cut costs, increase revenue, all that sort of stuff. When you're confronted with those sort of demands, you certainly need some superpowers and a thick skin. We're not necessarily the people who can bring the solutions. We might be the people who have to bring the bad news as well. So remember, though, one thing that EA has been proven to do, and the value of architecture in general, is to help the business make better quality decisions. So, better decisions, okay, and more accurate decisions, not necessarily, the right answer, though. We can't necessarily make up, fantastic things. We just are the voice of reason amongst all this kind of noise. So yeah, let's have a look at what skills an AI architect, or dare I say an EA architect, sorry, an enterprise architect with an AI lens is going to need going forward, and what we think. First and foremost, you guys know it. You talked about democratized diagramming. So we agree, connected data and diagrams, those two areas of, data-driven analytics and, diagram-driven EA are essential. What does that mean in reality? So you guys are asked, sorry, we asked you guys, what are the things you need to be presenting most often? How do you communicate with your stakeholders? So, working as an architect, you need to understand how things interconnect, how the networks work, how the databases work, how the systems work, but also how that all integrates or connects with, the business goals, business capabilities, business processes, things like that. So you need to have that holistic, interconnected view of an enterprise. That's what an architect is. That's our DNA, as we think in an interconnected way. Um, Humans are visual thinkers. So we do a lot of research on this over the years. Being able to visualize things in 2 dimensions is fundamental to how we think. In fact, in 3 dimensions as well. So that means diagrams and the relationships between things. You'll find most architects waving their hands around about how things interconnect and jumping up to a whiteboard and showing how this connects to this connects to that. So it's not just lists of things. It's not just a table of stuff. It's the things themselves and how they interconnect with each other is where all the value is. Now, we've seen a bit of a dilution of that core EA message over the last few years, but I certainly want to let you know that Avolution has stayed true to that philosophy, and we always will. That's how we started 20 something years ago, and it's where we will continue to go, is diagram driven and data driven, not one or the other. Um, and it's, I guess, still relatively underrepresented at the moment. You can see that risk assessment's pretty low from you guys. I think you'll find that's actually there's going to be increased demand for that over the coming year, and I'll talk you through a framework that exists that you guys can leverage to do that as well. So what does it really mean? So I've just got a bit of an animation here around, it's just a dashboard we put together. One of my colleagues did for some capability modeling work they did before. So I shout out to Corinna for doing this work, and her presentation's online if you can go to our YouTube page. But basically, you're using drill downs and filters to go through, diagrams. We're showing a partition view in the bottom right there, of course, pie charts. The left is actually a capability map. And as you're going into one area, the other areas are dynamically updating. Okay. And you're seeing how things are all actually interconnected. When you're looking at a view, which is what each of these portlets are, they are just a view into a central repository that has all the information. So, of course, when you make a change in one place or inquire into one place and drill into one place, the other parts should dynamically refresh as well, right? It's a basic feature that you would expect every tool to do, right? And ours certainly does that. So whether you're going into a pie chart, whether you're going into a partition chart, whether you're going into a diagram, they will all stay coherent with each other. So yeah, I mean, obviously a capability dashboard is something that you can understand where you're investing, and that's what we're showing here. And then we switch to a capability maturity view, and you can see things you're familiar with. You can see there some business process modeling notation, right? The business is familiar with that as a notation. So these things are all different ways that different lenses into the one set of data. And that's what we mean by interconnected, data-driven and diagram-driven information is a key skill you guys all need to have, and thankfully Abacus provides. The next thing that I think I've talked about a fair bit, and I really just want to hone in on here is, you guys get it, right? You guys, that survey you talked about how I think it was 22% of you think that we need more than just large language models. We need machine learning. We need other forms of AI. So, yeah, let's just talk a little bit about large language models and what there is more than that. So, hopefully you've all heard of this capability we have in Abacus. We've had it for a while now. It's called Ask Abacus. And it's not just a large language model. Okay, it's been built for many, many years. We're certainly pioneers in this area. It came out a long time before ChatGPT did. So there's a few things I really want to call out here. It has a whole continuous learning dimension to it. So as you update your data, Abacus learns from that and continues to be trained. You probably know that ChatGPT is trained off stuff that's pretty old, and it's a very difficult thing to retrain, whereas our Ask Abacus is continually being trained. You set up a frequency for how often you want it to relearn from what you're doing, and we certainly have clients doing it every 8 hours, basically picking up whatever's been populated that day and building that overnight to then be in their repository the next morning as some increased insights. It has contextual understanding, so it's obviously based on the data that's in your repository, and it's leveraging the graph structure that we have. So it doesn't transform everything into a large language model. It's better than that. It actually does it contextually, and it understands the true structure of what you've got. It's not just predicting the next word in a sentence as you're typing. Like, it's not like that. It's actually looking at filling in structures and understanding structures, and it's incredible. As you guys start to use it more and more, you'll be amazed at what it's able to do. There's no privacy concerns. There's no copyright concerns. It's not using anything that you guys might, get sued for later. It's just using your data. It's all quarantined into your information. There's no leakage of this out anywhere other than within your repository. That's where it's all contained. It's not going to infringe on anyone else's, IP or anything like that. So you can feel very safe in knowing that it's all just your data. But then really interesting, I talked about those 3 T's around, trust was built through transparency and time. So we're doing a lot of work to try to make the insights that Abacus is giving, the Ask Abacus is giving, as to be transparent. Right. So there's confidence intervals. So we don't pass off guesses as just fact. We'll give a confidence interval. We'll say, look, we're only 35% confident of something. And actually, that's what you can see in that graphic there is the highlighting we use. So we'll highlight, you can set a threshold in your repository. You can say that if it's above, 99% or something like that, color the border green. If it's below, let's say 30%, color it red. So you can really start to call out areas that you're confident in, right? So you can see here that US department's only 0.12% confident of it being the actual department that owns, in this case, maybe that application, right? So we found effectively an anomaly in the data. And we're saying, look, actually, we think there's another department, Department 11, that we're 97% confident it probably should be. So, hey, maybe you want to switch to that. It doesn't change data. Ask Abacus won't just automatically change data for you. It will just give you suggestions. So it's still up to you as a human to confirm any recommendations it gives you, which then, of course, helps go into the training set. I don't know if you can see subtly there. Some of the fields are in light gray. That just means they've been filled in as a suggestion. They're not actually values in the repository. You can right click, of course, and go accept and help build the confidence that's in there. But nonetheless, it's giving you just those, we call it highlighting. It's just giving you those suggestions. That's all Ask Abacus is doing. When you look at use cases, right? So I've just got a few examples here, but literally Ask Abacus can answer any question you have, right? You've got to think of it as an overlay on any portfolio you have, whether it's, should we be doing this strategy? Should we be retiring this application? Should we be investing in this project? Anything that you've got in your repository, Ask Abacus is able to overlay some insights on top of. Okay. When you're diagramming, it obviously tells you which things you should be connected to, all this kind of stuff, right? So, we built it from the ground up many years ago to help answer these sorts of questions that we knew architects were being asked to do, right? So, like I say, it can find anomalies in the data. It can flag servers that are, that are redundant. It can, it's generative, so it will fill in content in your repository if you want it to. So it's absolutely something that can, improve the quality of information in your repository, which of course leads to better quality decisions. Okay, so the use cases for this are, trust me, unending. It supports you in every way you work as an architect. So it's essentially augmented enterprise architecture, right? We know it's a perfect blend of human and machine now as a way of working together, and our productivity will increase. I guarantee you. We'll be one of those, those groups like the data scientists who are, sort of 30-40% better at, in demand, and like those BCG consultants that were 30-40% more productive by using it. But then there is still some good old, numbers that we know. So AI should only ever be a co-pilot, right? It should only sit alongside us and help us to be better architects. We work alongside Ask Abacus to make better decisions. So there are analytics that we understand perfectly well already, and you don't need a machine to help you with, right? There's some pretty basic formulas that we know. So whether it's maybe, cost per user for an application, right? All you need to know is what's the cost of your application, how many users are there, and get your divide out, right? So we have no code algorithms that will do all these sorts of things, right? So you're able to no code all of those, what would you refer to as deterministic algorithms. So they're ones that are just a basic formula, right? And you're leveraging the graph structure to do those. So still do those, right? Some of those basic things should all be just running in the background in all of your repositories, just coming up with metrics. And we've got presentations later on through the day and tomorrow of some of our customers leveraging that. So it's definitely a thing that you really should be doing. But it's that hybrid nature of doing analytics, which is blending deterministic algorithms, like a no-coded one, where you're just, doing a formula, with the non-deterministic stuff that Ask Abacus can do. There's some pretty fantastic stuff. Again, I could talk for an hour about Ask Abacus. It's been my passion and my pride for many years. But you can blend Ask Abacus recommendations into deterministic formulas. Okay, so it's a pretty amazing capability that we've got. So where does it come back to? Cost, as always, if you remember. So really, it's about trying to leverage that graph structure. So like I say, there's going to be places where we know things. So if you pull in your supplier list, you'll know what they're supplying. You'll know how much you're paying them, right? So there's going to be ways that, or areas where you have a high confidence because it's just direct source data. Okay, but then it's blending together that data into other areas, leveraging the graph to come up with the things that we, I guess, didn't know we knew, right? So essentially taking the things we know and in the places we know them, leverage them across the graph structure to come up with insights where we didn't know we actually had a clear understanding of. So doing that in the financial modeling world is absolutely a key place for you guys to be successful, to be able to talk about all of these different use cases from a cost lens as well. And so we have a whole lot of analytics around that you guys really should be leveraging. And then, yes, I did just want to give a shout out to this technique. So there is a framework out there now. It comes from NIST. It's a risk management framework. You can see here that it's basically it's certainly taken a lot of best practices. It's leveraged some of the work that's come out of Singapore as well, but it's structured around two main sections, and they each have I guess, a distinct role to play in this. So the first section is around guiding organizations to identify AI risks in the first place, and leveraging looking at the characteristics of trustworthiness in systems. So like any risk management methodology, the risks are assessed based on their potential to cause harm or their impact and the likelihood of that happening or the probability of it happening. So the framework does acknowledge the complexity, though, around some of these AI risks. And importantly, the framework looks to try to prioritize them so that you obviously focus on the things you want, but it doesn't really set, and it leaves each organization up to set a risk tolerance within it. So of course, different organizations are going to have different tolerances for different risks. That's the first section, is really just identifying risks in the first place. The second section then focuses on the four key governance areas, right? You can see that in the graphic on the right there. So govern, map, measure, and manage. So those functions can be tailored to suit specific situations, and they're applied at the different stages in the the AI lifecycle. So govern basically establishes the accountability structures from a safety first point of view. Map then looks for organizations to categorize them into capabilities, goals, impacts. So that's where you're obviously using a tool like Abacus. You're mapping all of the risks into the things that they impact within the broader enterprise architectural landscape. Measure, of course, supports all the risk analysis and benchmarking techniques. So again, you're using all the no-code algorithms and things like that to understand what the impacts are going to be, what the probability is going to be. So we have lots of great techniques to support that. And then finally, manage involves, of course, prioritizing the risk, allocating resources to mitigate them, closing them out, living with them, watching them. There's all different, approaches you can take, versus, mitigate them or watch them or accept them and all that kind of stuff. So continuous improvement mechanisms and things like that. So I'd strongly suggest you get access to that. It's all open source. It's free. You can get access to it. We've already built it into Abacus. So talk to your account managers, find out how you can get access to that. But it's already available in Abacus if you want to start using that tomorrow, effectively. So yeah, this is my sort of last slide here. I really just wanted to I was a bit wary about using this one. So really what's happening and where we are today is, we're in a bit of a tug of war. That's the way I see it, right? You've got the business and you've seen, the Gen Zers even more than the boomers are kind of going all in on using, AI. And, there's a whole lot of shadow AI out there. People are using this stuff, right, already. So I think, you've got to accept that the horse has bolted quite a lot there. It's pulling back a little bit. I've talked about how, of course, some of the C-suite have kind of halved their usage of it in the last 6 months. So I think it's still, got some ways to go, but there's obviously, improvements happening all the time, in this area. But you've got this tug of war. So the business is kind of going all in, and then you've got your security teams and your IT teams, rightly being a bit cautious. There's a lot of, privacy concerns, a lot of, copyright infringement concerns, leakage of, data sovereignty, all that sort of stuff. So I think there's a real tug of war going on here. And so I guess when you think about the metaphor for us as enterprise architects, we've often talked about ourselves as trusted advisors, to a business and to the IT. So I guess in this metaphor, you can kind of see maybe where the referees of this tug of war. I don't want us to be the anchor. We're not the handbrake. We're not the policeman. We just need to be the referees to sort of understand what the implications of these things are between the two kind of factions here, right? And, because there is some, like I say, at the moment, there's some pretty dramatic things. Companies have just flat out banned it, right? So I don't know if that's the right approach. I think we need as EAs to step in and be the kind of referees and help kind of negotiate the best position here. So, and again, I think we're uniquely positioned to do that and to make good quality recommendations, which of course is, part of why we're, more in demand than we ever have been before.